believe that. Chapter 11, The Mystery of Room Number 342. Mrs. Day tells her daughter that there is someone willing to take their house along with all possessions. The daughter is relieved to hear this. The mother also informs her that they have to go to Paris and sign certain papers in connection with her father's property. A few weeks later, they reach Paris. Mrs. Day is rather nervous as she had been reading in the papers that the whole world had come to Paris for the exhibition. She is worried whether they would get an accommodation. A few minutes later, they reach Crillon, the hotel in which they have booked a room. The clerk at the reception informs them that they should consider themselves fortunate as a client cancelled at the last minute. It was a single room, but the hotel was willing to put in an extra bed for Miss Day. They were handed the keys of room number 342. Settling in their room, Miss Day suggested to her mother that they should go down to the restaurant to have some dinner, but the mother was not quite up to it, since her mother wasn't feeling any better the next morning. Miss Day asked the hotel to send in a doctor. The doctor turned up very soon. He seemed to be an affable person. While examining the mother, he is informed that they had left Bombay after the death of the husband, and that they had travelled overland from Marseilles to arrive at Paris the previous evening. As he was leaving the room, he asked the daughter to meet him at the reception. At the reception, the doctor suggested that it would be best to move the mother to the hospital. He also asked her to go to his house to fetch some medicine for her mother. He told her that his house was at the other end of Paris and that they didn't have a phone, but that it was necessary for her to go and fetch the medicine. The house seemed really far and the cab in which she was travelling seemed to be crawling as slowly as possible. Several times she thought it was going in the wrong direction, for when she looked out of the window, she was certain that they were going along streets that they had already been through once. At last, however, the cab stopped in front of a house. The girl got out. She had to ring the bell several times before the door was opened by the doctor's wife. The wife read the note and asked her to sit down until it was ready. It seemed to take a long while. While waiting, she is surprised to hear the telephone ring because she remembered the doctor telling her that he had not got one. At last, however, the medicine is ready. The drive back to the hotel was even slower than the drive out. And when they got back to the center of the town, the cab driver stopped outside a hotel that was unknown to her. She now felt certain that something was wrong. A few yards away, she noticed a young man who, to judge by his clothes, could not be anything else but English. And although modest by nature, she jumped out of the cab and ran up to him. "Excuse me for addressing a perfect stranger, but you are English, aren't you?" The stranger responded cordially that he was indeed English all right. He also asked if there was any way he could help. She said, "My name is Miss Day. My mother and I are staying at the Carillon. As she wasn't very well this morning, I got the hotel doctor to see her. He told me that it was serious and sent me off to his house at the other end of Paris to fetch some medicine for her." The doctor gave the driver instructions and he drove as slowly as possible, very often driving, I am sure, in the wrong direction, for we drove up several streets more than once. Then I had to wait for ages at the doctor's house. While the medicine was being prepared, The doctor said that he couldn't phone his wife as he had no phone. But while I was sitting, I heard the telephone ring in the next room. Then, on the way back, the driver drove slower than ever. And now, instead of taking me back to the carillon, he has brought me here. I just can't understand at all. The stranger introduced himself as John Bates. He was a junior secretary at the embassy in Paris. He offered to go along with her as far as the carillon, for it did all sound rather strange to him. At the carillon, they find the door of room number 342 locked, and so they went down to the clerk. The clerk, instead of handing her the key, asked her whom she wished to meet. Miss Day explained that she had registered at the hotel the previous night with her mother and that they were given room number 342. The clerk gave her a quizzical look and politely insisted that she had not checked in the previous evening. But just to be doubly sure, he asked her for the room number again. Miss Day said, room number 342. But I do not understand. Maid Moseley for room number 342 has been taken by Monsieur Lay. He often stays at the hotel. He is a very good friend of ours, replied the clerk. But I did register here yesterday evening with my mother. I demand to see the registration papers which were filled in by people yesterday, said Miss Day in an irritating tone. As you wish, Maddie Moseley, but you will certainly find that you have not registered here. She went through the previous day's registration papers several times, but failed to find those filled in by her mother and herself. The clerk asked her if she was satisfied, retorting that she was far from satisfied. She added that it was the clerk who had given them the papers to fill in. She remembered the clerk quite distinctly on account of the ring that he had on his finger with the blood-red stone in it. The clerk insisted that he had never seen her before. He suggested that it could be the heat acting on her. Miss Day asked for the manager and the doctors as they would surely remember her. The manager did not seem to recognize her either. John Bates suggested that perhaps the doctor who examined her mother would recognize her. Then to the manager he said, perhaps I had better introduce myself. John Bates, a secretary of the British Embassy here. I think that I must insist that you call the doctor. Even the doctor failed to recognize her. He suggested that she could be suffering from the heat as she was looking extremely white and nervous. Miss Day retorted sharply, don't worry about me. How's my mother? Will it be necessary to send her to the hospital? The doctor insisted that he had never seen her mother, nor her until a few minutes ago. That did it for Miss Day, and she turned to John Bates and requested him to take her away from there. John Bates was quite sure that the girl was telling the truth despite hearing the accounts of the clerk, the manager and the doctor at the hotel. He took her to a small restaurant and listened to her story while convincing her to eat a little. Bates told Miss Day that he was prepared to do everything he could to help. He was convinced that the embassy would help out if she could prove as much of it as possible. He suggested that they should go to see the shipping company by whose boat they had travelled to Marseilles. Bates spent the afternoon taking to the shipping company and their representatives. All confirmed the story the girl had told him. He then placed the matter before a senior official of the embassy. At this stage, John Bates suggested, since we are going to work together for a time, wouldn't it make matters easier if you drop the Mr. Bates and start calling me John right away? Miss Day responded, all right, you can call me John then. Later in the day, Bates asked John to think hard and give the details of room number 342 as the embassy was going to arrange to get permission to look at it. John mentioned that the curtains were cream colored, the chairs were covered with some red material, the wallpaper was also cream colored and covered with big red roses. The bed, as far as John could remember, was an ordinary wooden bed. The following day, Bates returned to inform John that everything in the room was quite different from the description given by her. What was even more intriguing was that the wallpaper had only just been put up and that in one or two places it was not yet quite. He also managed to get hold of the name and address of the man who does the paper hanging for the hotel. So they headed off there. The paper hanger, though shiftily at first, admitted that he was sent for suddenly the previous day. When he got to the carillon, they were busy moving furniture out of a room number 342. He was told up to put up a fresh paper as quickly as possible. Bates also tried asking the helpers and workers at the carillon, but he could not get a word out of them. By this time, John had given up all hope of ever seeing her mother again. Bates said that there was still one chance left. One of the heads of the French police was in America for some time, but he would be returning in 4 or 5 days. The first secretary knew this person rather well, so Bates was sure that he will be able to get the true story out of the head of the French police. A week later, Bates grimly informed John that the first secretary had talked to his friend in the police. John immediately sensed that it was not good news. Bates told her that the doctor who came to see her mother recognized at once that she was suffering from the Black Plague. He sent her off so that he would have time to remove the mother to the hospital. That very afternoon her mother had died. The French did not want to the news of her mother's death to get into the French papers. The exhibition had started only a short time before, and they were afraid that the news of a visitor dying of the Black Plague would cause Paris to be emptied of visitors at once. It was agreed that the whole thing must be kept a secret. State weather. Fill in the Chapter 12. The